哎呀，被搬掉了。
谁啊？
Let's wait for more students to come. Uh, please have a more waiting because we only have 82 students, about 2 more minutes. Okay, let's start today's research. So you know that because outbreak of COVID-19, I hope some of you have already gone back to mainland China, or you are still thinking about, because Hong Kong, I think, is a bit of danger. So please take good care of yourself. Either stay in Hong Kong, stay inside home, or you can think of other potential plan. For myself, I also catch a cold, but I have checked myself. It's not, positive, so it's negative. So that's why I am thinking about whether I should cancel today's lecture. But I think because it's not positive, so I decided to start plan this lecture as scheduled. Well, today we are going to introduce a interesting topic about the capital for space market. Is talking about determination of housing rent. So let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. The title is a bit different from the syllabus, but I think it's we're going to prioritize this lecture first for talking about the market for space and what are the determinants for housing rate. So we're going to introduce a very important part of FDW model. And there are some revisiting of the law of demand. And we're going to be talking about how to set up the determination or the determinants of demand for a good and the price elasticity of demand. We are also going to introduce the demand function of housing space and the determinants of housing demand. The third point is the adjustment of rental level that we're going to thinking about how the change in housing demand would affect the housing rent. So these are the main four agendas we are going to talk today. So in part one, first and foremost part, we're going to thinking about how we should, give the FDW model a quick introduction, like the Fisher. So this is a very famous model that we have been trying to introduce in the past. But we'll understand that for this, we have to have a brief notes of the FDW model. Like, firstly, is that have the dual market nature for housing. That do have the conventional economic analysis. We will assume that it do not work, the conventional one. According to Fisher in 1992, and DW in 1992 as well, they set up a model for two market analysis. And so they will assume that a real estate economy is considered a system in equilibrium. And the third one is assumptions. The assumptions that would treat its FDW model is they have treated all the units as homogeneous. And generally speaking, they're tenure neutrality. So for FDW model, so we have included here as four parts. If we look at the right hand, the upside, that's a space market. That's what we're going to introduce here today first. The capital will be the next chapter, but we're going to introduce space market first in quadrant 1. The space allocation. So suppose D equals to F, bracket R, comma, economy and demography. So that is the, we say the D will be playing their roles here. So that is generally speaking the space allocation. So in the capital market, we will look at how the valuation of the rent will be evaluated according to the P and the K minus G time, and this we say A, how large A would be. Okay, in quadrant 3 is we look at how many buildings or how many constructions would construction activity would happen. So that is a P equals to A added a B multiplied by Q. And this is a new supply as the Q. And the Q equals D multiplied by S. That is new additions of S, new additions. So this is what we said the quotient for the new additions that equals to D multiplied by S. So these are the four quadrants. Basically, we're going to try to make this one by one. For the first building block 1, so that is capital goods. Capital goods was used in intermediate stage for the production of final goods or services, like they have machines, transport vehicles, the real estate. And housing is considered as a type of capital goods as well. So generally speaking, construction and housing provide space for production of different services. For example, their accommodation, the family activities, etc. And for capital goods that depreciate and need a lot of replacement, like if we set the price capital good equals to replacement cost, also done by the capital good. So this is how the calculation would be, measured. The second rule is building block 2. We would say the price of using the capital goods. That is how we calculate the price of using the capital goods. So for the production of goods or services, you need to hire the machines. So you need to pay the rent. As we say, the rent is the price of using the capital good. And housing provides space for production of different housing services. And the rent of housing is the price to use the space. How to determine the market rental level of housing, and how to determine the equilibrium market price of a good. And so the second issue is how about the supply and demand. The third building block would be the prices of the capital goods. So every capital good has a price, and this price will generally depend on, firstly, the rental income derived from the good itself and how long the economic life would be. So usually we look at how long the rental incomes would be calculated. The fourth block is supply of new stock. So we use AD. AD is aggregate demand. When the aggregate demand for housing space is static, the supply of new capital goods would depend on, firstly, the rate of depreciation, 2, the cost of construction or replacement. And for the new stock of housing that is to be supplied, we would say with more prices that people are willing to pay larger than the price of housing. That is one for new stock house. Another one is the prices that people are more willing to pay, which is larger than the cost of replacement. So this is the two building block issues. And for the law of demand for part B, we got a revisit. The law of demand, a revisit is if we say the other things being equal, if we suppose, when the price of a good rises, the quantity demand of the good falls. So that is, if we see the right-hand side is price of cup noodle, wow. During this COVID-19, the cup noodle become more and more expensive because people might have more and more demand, but the supply will become less and less. So the quantity of the cup noodle demanded is like from 0 to 10. So that is where we say there is a negative relationship between the price and quantity demanded of a good, according to Simon's demand curve. And then if we compare Simon's and my demand curve, you can generally compare between the two cup noodle, the price of cup noodle between, the two, people. So that is how we look at the demand and supply curve that is determined by the price of cup noodle and the quantity of the cup noodle demanded. So that's the main, in this market. Another, interesting aggregate demand or market demand couldn't is like, the demand schedule. So the price of a cup noodle between salmon shilling is with, when we check 5 here, sorry, it's with both 0, right? And but when the $3, salmon got 4, right? But me got 2. Okay, so if you can calculate this, and we can put them aggregation. So this is our demand. So at each of this quantity demand, we can come up with such kind of curve and total into the aggregate demand. When we're trying to give this, more and more people are considered. The demand curve moves upward or rightward or rotates anti-clockwise. So that is how we look at, at different points. 6 and 3, 9 to 2, and 12, 1. So this is how aggregate demand curve would be calculated. With more and more people are considered, the demand curve moves upward or rightward, or even rotate anti-clockwise. So once at this time, how can we determine the demand for a good? So firstly, it would move along the demand curve with the price of the good that may change in quantity demanded. And the shifting either upward or downward, the demand curve. That was firstly the income of the consumer or household and relative price of substitutes and complements. So this is the condition of either shifting upward or downward. And thirdly is a taste of the consumer or household. And lastly is expectation, like how about the future price? So this is how the income of the consumer or household, like quantity of good with X demanded, but the price of good is like 500, for example, or 100 per unit. And with that, we can try to calculate the income of the consumer of household. So that is the main income. For the substitutes, and you may consume either one only, Coca-Cola or Pepsi. So when the unit price of Coca-Cola increases, or when the unit price of Coca-Cola decreases, it might have different, from the unit price of 10 to 9, the demand quantity will be dropped somehow. So same as gasoline, for the automobile, with more automobile, the gas line's price will be increased because there will be more and more demand. So this is quite easy to check about the price, right? It's easy for you to understand, I think. And after the promotion by the superstar, the drinking Pepsi looks trendy. So if we said the Pepsi is found to be carcinogenic, and the quantity of price of Pepsi and the quantity of Pepsi demanded are different. The expectation. The aggregate demand curve at this moment, when you expect the price of Pepsi will rise in the future. And you may expect the price of Pepsi will drop in the future. So that is the price of Pepsi and the quantity of Pepsi demanded with the number of cans. So that is how the average our aggregated demand curve at this moment. So if given that conditions, let's try to give the price elasticity of demand a calculation. The price elasticity of demand which measures how the quantity demanded responds to a change in price. So mathematically, the price elasticity of demand equals to the total percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. So for every 1% increase in the price, the quantity demanded will decrease by 10%. And that is minus 10. So we put the elasticity of demand. So that is for every 1% minus 10%. Okay. So the greater is the value, we say in the absolute term, and the more responsive or more elastic is the quantity demanded to the change in price. And this is the price elasticity of demand that equals to the quantity of good Y demanded with the price of good Y. So that is a price elasticity of demand. Graphically, like put left-hand side, a quantity demanded does not respond much to the price change. So this is, we put this as highly inelastic. And any, we say, comparatively speaking, in small change in price results in a large change in the quantity demanded. So one is highly inelastic and highly elastic. So this is the determinant of the price elasticity of demand that was alcoholic and was non-alcoholic, that is drinks. And drinks alcoholic include wine, spirit, beer, and for the non-alcoholic, they have soft drink, milk, juice, for example. That is become from narrower to broader. So that is determine the plus. Part A, the demand function of housing space. So we all know people would rent a house, right? In once you got a place to live, right? So let's put this and make this try to be simple. Renting is an agreement where a payment is made for the temporary use of goods or the property owned by another person or company. So this is renting, right? And rent is the amount that you pay the owners of the good or property for the right to use it. For example, for hiring a van for transportation goods, or for renting a flat for accommodation. Who will pay the rents? It's very clear that the tenants have to pay the rents to the landlords. What if a property is owner occupied? For example, it's suppose a property is owned by a person who occupies a property by himself or herself. And there are two roles taken by the owner occupier, like owner of the asset, or they receive the rent or the use of space in the asset, or they pay rent to the owner. And this housing rent is considered as a cost of using the housing space. So if we put into a DW model, and then we can try to give this a metaphor and calculation from here. Suppose if we look at household income in Hong Kong, the population census, by census since 1981 to 2016, the median monthly income from main employment is from 5,170 until 11,000. And then the median monthly household income is between 2,955 until 20,500. So this is how the median monthly income. If we put the, this kind of, how to say, the specific monthly, well, we would less than 2,000. That is 2,000 to 3,000 and 3,999. So this is between the median income. And we can see that the rich people have become more and more with 60,000 more, and the total would be like this. This will happen in 1991 to 2016. You can see that the census and people's households income, that is generally the percentage is increasing of the rich, the middle class, but still there are a lot of lower income people. For the householder formation in Hong Kong, we can see the population census between 1981 to 2016. So number of household between the number is also changed. That changed around 4.3%. And this number in 1996 have changed, grown to around 3.5%. And this is a kind of annual growth rate in terms of the over the past 5 years. So the formation of the household, that you can see that how it drop up and down. And the domestic property rental index is increasing from 1981 to 2011. So this is how the number index drive. So between 2015, it's rising to 172.8. While the Part D is the adjustment of rental level. The determinants of the market rent, we would say that we would, if we look at the house rent in the X, in the Y and X is the stock of the housing space put in square meters, and D equals to F, put bracket R, comma economy, comma demography. So if we suppose a fixed supply is S, so they got two different lines between the first line D. So let's suppose in the short run, the market rent depends heavily on the position of the demand curve. In the other word, the market rent depends on, firstly, the household income. Two, the household formation. That is, this is the formation, right? We can see how it grows, but it's generally really depends on that. 30 is immigration, which means how many people enter into this new market and becoming the home purchaser. So that would also bring along the market rent. This is in the short run. But what happens in the long run? Here's a mechanism of rental formation. Let's suppose we have a different mechanism here, like that have the shift in demand for housing space. This is due to the changes in demographic and microeconomic conditions. And second one is a change in vacancy rate. This vacancy rate would decrease when the demand for housing space increases. And last but not least is adjustment in rental level. That is DR divided by R equals to alpha Vn minus Vo. This is natural vacancy rate theory. And DR divided by R, this is adjustment in rental level. So that is how the mechanism rental would, formate. And this is the nature and observed vacancies between VO and VN. We have two deltas, right? And between the VN and VO, when VO is larger than the VO, and we can see two deltas, right? And with rent decreases. And the VN is larger than VO, and we can see there are more rental change and more rental increases. And the last but not least is observed vacancy rate. And that is how the practical vacancy rate could be witnessed. And last but not least is the natural vacancy rate in the red line, natural vacancy rate. Between these two, there are other. So that is how in the long run, the housing rent would be determined. Another is variations in rental levels, like the housing attributes. So firstly, we put assumption of homogeneity relax. 2 is a housing space with vary in the following aspects. 1 is a physical setting, like the size, floor level, the layout, etc. B is the location, like the distance from the CBD. And C is the view, like we say, the sea view. And D is the environmental quality, like the quietness, air quality, etc. And amenities, like the clubhouse, the school network facilities, etc. So these are the 4 or 5 spaces that would vary. Some easy to grab, concepts. We can see some demand function for housing space that may depict how the changes in microeconomic forces would affect market rental level. This would help determine the new equilibrium market rental level. And secondly, the rental formation mechanism would be determined by, firstly, we have already known new equilibrium market rental level, and it might concern the rate of rental change when the market rental level adjusted to the new equilibrium from one. So as we said, from this equilibrium to another. So they may have such kind of observed kind of equilibrium. So we have introduced the main summary of this lecture. So I would like to try to give a short break, 10 minutes break, and we may watch some video and also may engage some conversations and discussions later on. Come back after 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. So let's come back to the today's lecture. So I have summarized it briefly just now, but now I would like to share with you a FTW models video. It has clearly explained how does it works.
I'm going to talk about the four-quadrant model. It's from the University of San Diego, Brennan Moore Center. And this discussion is meant to support lectures on this particular topic that are derived from a book by David Geltner and myself, along with Jim Clayton and Pete Eichholz. It's the third edition, chapter 2 that I'm referring to, but previous editions also cover the four-quadrant model. This model is important because it connects the space and the asset models. It connects the markets for real estate assets, that is what we're willing to pay for real estate, independent of the market for the space itself. So let me go ahead and explain a little bit about how this works. So let's start with the upper quadrant. What you have in the upper quadrant on the right side here is quantity and rent. And you could typically see an economic graph of supply and demand with price and stock. Here we have just the demand portion, and we're going to put the supply portion down here. I'll come back to that in a minute. So this demand curve slopes down because the higher the rent would be, or price, the less would be demanded. So you see that it slopes such that the higher the rent, the less demanded. Let's look at the next quadrant. Here we have the rent level, and here we have the price that somebody will pay in the market, the typical investor, for that given rent level. So the slope of this line here is the ratio between what the market will pay in price for a given level of rent. You can think of that as a price to rent ratio, but it is in fact the inverse of a cap rate. Of course, it's a cap rate on the total rent in this case, but you can think of it as reflecting cap rates and yields in the market. A cap rate in the market, of course, is a current yield calculation defined as the net operating income divided by price. But this slope right here is pretty important because it reflects how much a property is worth per dollar of rent. Now, if this slope would flatten out, that would mean that people are willing to pay a higher price for a given level of rent and accept lower yields. And that would raise the price in the market for an asset, even at the same rent level. If, on the other hand, the yields would get steeper or higher and the slope would be more like this, what that would do would be pay less for a given level of rent. And that would lower the price or value of those assets in the market. So here we have the space market on the demand side. Here we have the asset market. And then let's go down to the lower quadrant on the left. This is a kink supply curve right here. It's fixed in the short run, and then it's fairly elastic. That is, at a given price, you will see more construction, so long as the price of that particular type of property exceeds construction cost. So this point where the kink is the cost feasible value of the property, above which you'll see new construction, below which you'll see none. And here we have a adjustment to the stock as we add more supply in terms of adding supply and quantity. And technically we should have an adjustment there for units lost as well, but you can think of this line as being a net adjustment. All right, let's go ahead and say what happens if something changes in the market. What if the demand would increase? Then at the same rent level, we would see more quantity demanded. Let's go ahead and do that. So demand increases because maybe population increased or jobs increased, increasing the population. But for whatever driver at that same rent level, you see that the quantity demanded is right here, a much higher Q or quantity level than we have before. Again, at this rent level, it hits the demand curve here, it hits the supply curve here, or the quantity line here. And so there's a much higher quantity demanded at that rent level than before. Let's go ahead and see what happens as we extend this. At the current level of quantity supply, right there, where you see the dot red line go up, the rents are going to increase, aren't they? And they're going to increase all the way up to that R1. Now note that before, the price that was supported was at this rent level and this price. Now it's much higher. Let's continue to take it down. That P1 level is way above the kink, way above cost feasible construction. Of course, this is an exaggerated curve, but you see that it hits the construction rate way out there. Everybody's going to try to add supply as quick as they can and try to add net new supply. And you can see that this doesn't really look like an equilibrium because it doesn't really match up as a square where all the markets are connected. It is possible, of course, for the market to overshoot and go through cycles, and we see that all the time. But let's go ahead and assume that, that the market doesn't overshoot. Then it anticipates who's going to add supply and does not overshoot. What would equilibrium look like? Something a little bit more like this. Demand increases, forcing rents up at first, reducing vacancy down to 0 perhaps. And the value of the properties initially go up to this higher level R1. The prices are up at that level, but as we add new supply and the market sees it coming, it reduces the value of the properties a little bit. And we end up getting this rectangle or square that connects all the markets in equilibrium. And the point is this: the market's always working towards and trying to move towards equilibrium, even though sometimes it may undershoot or overshoot. Also keep in mind there's a normal level of vacancy in the market at all the time, and that should be expected. What happens if we change the slope in the asset market? That is what somebody's willing to pay for $1 of rent. So here we change the yield from 11%, I know that's high by today's standards, but the graph still works, to something lower, 8%. The slope moves down. The value of the property, which would have been right here, now moves all the way out to here. The price of the property is now much higher. You can see the new supply will be induced from this level to this level. And we're going to see quantity move from here all the way out to there. So here's the point. Even if rents don't change, vacancy doesn't change. If the yields required in the market are reduced, you're going to induce new supply. I hope that makes sense. Let me reverse it. If the yields required went the other way and were higher, the prices would go down below cost feasible construction and you would get no new supply. So this can work in both directions. That is, we may be at cost feasible prices right now, but if yields would go down, it would increase the value of the assets and you could get new supply. And if yields required would go up, it would shut off new supply. So there's an asset market connection to the amount of supply that's independent of the vacancy rate and the particular demand and supply that we see in the space market. That is, the space market could have a given vacancy, even 15%, but if the yields are going down enough, you might even see new construction in a market that may have what might seem to be abnormally high vacancy. But because yields go down enough, you could still see new supply induced. Again, the point is that the asset market valuation is related to, but somewhat independent of, the space market. It's related to it in terms of risk, but in terms of yield, that's really dependent on the other alternatives in the capital market and the appetite for real estate. And I'd like to thank you for your time. I hope that makes sense. And I hope this helps for those of you that need review.
Well, that's all. I think that may helpful for you to really think about how it looks like in your, sorry, there's some. I want to try to engage one or more questions for today's, research. How do you think about the FDW when you try to use this to give your sharing? So I would like to open the discussion to talk about how do you think about the, FDW model, about the law of demand and how the rent is determined. I'm gonna give you around 5 minutes, and then I'm gonna to nominate a few names for that. And I want to give the FDW model for you. Here we are. Around 5 minutes to think how the housing rent is determined according to FDW model. That's my question. So I think perhaps we can start the answer. Apologize because I think I'm not quite sure whether you have comprehend the whole FDW model. So I just any people or students want to give the answer before I name? In that case, I'm going to name a few names. How about Châu Yi-Hwa?
Yes, Professor. I'm sorry. Actually, I am still thinking about the FDW model. I don't quite understand. Hello.
Okay. I'm going to upload this PPT and as well the YouTube later for you to have more in-depth understanding. Don't worry.
Thank you.
How
Thank you.
about Deng Ge? Ge Deng. Ge Deng, Deng Ge. Deng Ge. Are you there? How about Huang Ziyue?
Yeah, hello. I think this model describes some factors that influence the housing price. For instance, when the demand increases, I think the rent price, the rent will also increase. Other factors such as the total housing stock. When the total housing stock is higher, then the rent is tend to be lower. But for others, I still need to think more about it. Yes, thank you.
Okay. That's one of the possible answer, by the way. How about Jiang Rongyao? Jiang Rongyao.
So sorry, Professor. I think this question is too difficult for me.
You need more time to study, right?
Yeah, sorry.
How about Li Duoling?
Sorry, Professor, I'm still trying to understand the model.
Okay. In that case, do you want to try to have more time to prepare for this? Or you wanted to look at into maybe I send a video for you to have more learning about this. This one really get very clear. I mean, the video, very clear explanation for that. How about the Ling?
Hello, Professor. Yeah, in fact, just now my network connection is a little bit poor, so I ask you to repeat the question, and also the video I cannot listen clearly just now. I'm sorry, so maybe I will listen the video again from the link you sent to us.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay. So perhaps you can
Sorry for
study for
that.
more. It's okay. So I wonder if you prefer have more, because this FDW model is very important for you to comprehend. So you got to pick up some more time to think about how to comprehend this FDW model. Okay. This is quite significant issues. And so how about this? I upload this PPT slides and also some for your further understanding. And then after that, if you still have some question, you can ask me during the, like a tutorial session. Is that okay? And I do feel I also, for some reason, I think I had a bit of cough today. I'm a little bit worrying whether I got, some symptoms for COVID-19, but I'm trying to already check that is confirmed as negative. It's not positive, but still have some symptoms. So that may affect something. But also, I wish that everybody of you who's sitting down there try to take good care of yourself. Really do not go to too many places. And I'm going to see you at 30 later on during the tutorial. See you later. That's all for today's lecture. Bye-bye. Take care.